Coogs House. The Houston Cougars taking off with a familiar foe this weekend, but we need to get familiar with them a little bit more. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you're enjoying the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below if you've heard of or what you think of Cincinnati Chili. And to bring home that question, we brought on Jeff Carr, host of Locked On Reds, to talk about nothing but Cincinnati Chili today, right? That's what we're doing, Jeff. Jeff, what do you think about Cincinnati? What's your thought on Cincinnati Chili? Why is this thing so special?
Skyline better than Gold Star for sure. But here's the thing, though, with it, Parker, is that it's not chili in the traditional sense of the word. You're not supposed to eat it like soup. It's sauce. You put it on a hot dog, you put it on some spaghetti, you put it on fries. It's really, really good on fries. Or you make a great, almost like a 7-layer dip with Cincinnati chili, and you dip your nachos in there. That's how you eat. Because I've heard some folks before that drive through town, and they're like, I don't love it. And I'm like, well, how'd you get it? They're like, what do you mean? It's chili. I got a bowl. I'm like, no. That's not how you eat it. That's not how you eat it at all.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. I could sit here and talk about ways to eat chili for a long time on a hot dog, French fries, all very, very good options. But you're also a season ticket holder and very big fan of the Cincinnati Bearcats within Network. As we talk a little bit, I wanted to bring on to talk some about this game this weekend as someone who's seen them up close and in person. And so I guess my thing is, I think there's a lot of similarities in how these teams got to where they are today. But outside of like the Godfather Corleone, and I do want to talk about his potential, chaotic offseason and how that may have impacted him thus far. If there's a single name that anyone at home should know on the Cincinnati Bearcat roster before we get into the weekend, who would you say that is?
Corey Kiner. He's a guy that is not utilized enough. And in fact, they've only done this 4 times in his career in Cincinnati, but the 4 times that he has gotten 20 or more carries in a game, they're 3-1. And they just don't do it enough, and there's different reasons behind that. I mean, they trailed a lot last year in Scott Satterfield's first year in Clifton, but even this season, the first couple of games, he really didn't get a lot of run, and that one loss is the insane comeback that they allowed the Pitt Panthers to do on them in week 2. But it's all about the run game with Corey Kiner. And quite frankly, if Houston can neutralize him by a myriad of different ways, whether it's through defensive stops, he still has not been tackled for a loss yet. 3 games, not like a ton of run time there. But if they can neutralize him through getting up to a big score early, then they've got a really easy shot to win this game, because the UC defense is very, very inconsistent outside of the Godfather.
Well, on Kiner, I think a Houston fan might remember that name from a year ago. He had one of those games, he had 23 carries for 129 yards and a pair of touchdowns, and Cincinnati won that game. I mean, that's the recipe they've got. Houston looks a lot different this year, different coaching staff, a lot of transfer portal players, and so on. But I wonder if, that's in the back of everyone's mind, that run game. Well, that is Corey Kiner. I heard in doing research, and I want to hear your take on this, that they're also getting a right tackle back this weekend in Philip Wilderheendeh. He's a veteran, redshirt senior, and in college football now that could mean he's like 37 years old. But he's a big guy, 6'5", 315. He's coming back this weekend apparently. What kind of an impact does he have on the line, and what can you tell us about the line leading the way for Kiner?
That's been a really great thing for this team, and they've really struggled with it. Even in the final couple of years that Luke Fickell was the coach of the Bearcats, the offensive line was very inconsistent, but this year they returned all 5 starters, dealing with injuries to different guys at different times. So getting him back on that line is going to be huge. I mean, you talk about Luke Kandra on the interior, and you got Gavin Gerhardt snapping the ball in the middle. Like, you really feel good about the interior line. So what are you going to get from the tackles, and what does D'Artagnan Tinsley look like for them on the other side of Luke Kandra? That's really where it's all going to come to play, because there were a lot of plays in the second half where Pitt pressured Brendan Sorsby, kept them from really getting a lot in the run game and forcing them into a lot of 3-and-outs. And I think a lot of that had to do with rotating in and out new tackles and stuff like that. So getting him back, I feel like does help stabilize that unit a little bit more than what we expected from them in the first 3 games.
So you mentioned no one tackled Kiner for loss, and that getting offensive line back is going to help them. And so maybe this next question feels moot, but in looking at statistics here and getting ready for the weekend, one wide receiver jumps off the page in that he has more than twice as many catches as the next closest guy. And so if Houston were to neutralize the run, I'd imagine the next guy that you'd be calling out is Xzavier Henry. I think I'm saying that pronouncing that
Xzavier
correctly.
Henderson.
I'm sorry, Xzavier Henderson. He's got, again, 23 catches. The next highest is 11. What makes him the target for Cincinnati?
He just has a really good ability to high point the ball. And if Brendan Sorsby can put it in the right spot, there's definitely been some routes that he has run where he's underthrown or he's thrown it a little bit to his side. There's been a couple of catches that Xzavier Henderson has full on extended and made an amazing catch, but it was a dive, couldn't go anywhere with it. And he was able to kind of shake his guy before that even happened. So you're thinking, man, if this is the NFL, he probably gets up and gets 10 or 15 more yards on that play. So he has shown an ability to even be a kind of next level target. I don't know that he'd be a high round draft pick, but he could be a very interesting sleeper here in a year or two in the NFL draft. But it's interesting that you mentioned Xzavier Henderson because quite frankly, I think the number one target on this team is not Xzavier Henderson. It should be Joe Royer. It should be the tight end, number 11, transfer from Ohio State. Looks like an NFL tight end if I ever seen one. And quite frankly, we love saying around Cincinnati that we're tight end you. And I really feel like he is.
You've got one really famous one.
you got that one guy. Yeah, he's got a podcast or something like that. Yeah,
maybe we can bring him on the network next time around. So I would point out Roy mentioned looks the part, 6'5", 240. Did start off at Ohio State. Henderson also 6'3", $195. Not a little guy either. And then the tight end, Royer, has the 11 catches. He's the next highest I mentioned as well. I don't want to get out of the segment without mentioning any defensive players besides Godfather Corleone. The 3-3-5 sacks, interesting defense. Who sticks out in it for you?
Right now, it's Justin Bartlett. He really had a good game against Miami to get the victory bell back. But the 3-3-5, especially against Pitt, it was starting to make us wonder a little bit. And obviously, you got to give it time. It's a brand new system, brand new coach, a lot of different personnel that they're running in there than they had last year. So there's so much newness. And especially even in the first game against Towson State, where Towson really scored a lot on the Bearcats. I was not expecting to see a 2 at the front of their score unless they got a random safety against the Bearcats. But they scored 20 points against this Bearcats defense, and a lot of that was just new system and how does everything fit. You need those athletic linebackers, and the Bearcats don't exactly have that just yet. There's nobody I can kind of pinpoint and say that's the linebacker that they're leaning on, but Justin Bartlett on the edge kind of moved up there from middle linebacker to the edge spot, really caused a lot of havoc for Miami last week. So I'm looking at him to maybe continue a bit of a breakout, or was Miami more of a fluke? And they need somebody else on that line besides Dante Corleone to do something, though, and hopefully he's the guy that really jumps up out of the page.
Well, and Corleone's such a force in the middle there, and I want to stress that from afar, and this is before I get going too far. I am both pleasantly surprised and happy he's getting to play this year, and then the fan of me is like, dang, he's playing again this year. What is your two-line didn't read elevator pitch? What did he go through between seasons here?
He had, was it blood clots in his lungs, I think is what, or they were getting close to his lungs, because I think if you get blood clots in your lungs, that's really, really bad from a medical perspective. But he was dealing with blood clots. He wasn't dealing with like a muscle strain or something like that. It was far more serious and far more obscure than we have ever heard a player go through this. And quite frankly, whenever they said that there was an outside chance that he would play in week 1, like, wow, really? This, I mean, I don't know what a timetable looks like for a return from something like this, but didn't think it was going to be this year, if, maybe halfway through the season at best. And here he is playing week 2 against Pitt. He was definitely on a snap count. He would play about 2 on, 3 off. But then in Miami, I mean, he was playing almost normal amount of snaps in that game. So I don't necessarily think he's going to be super limited against Houston. And for that reason alone, I gotta give it up for the guy. I mean, other than the fact that he is just a world wrecker in the middle of that defensive line, and we saw, and that was probably a big reason that Townsend scored a lot on the Bearcats, is that they had nobody else in the interior defensive line to help out without Dante Corleone on the field. But just the fact that he is back is just so phenomenal, and I'm very, very happy to see it.
I'm happy he's healthy and back. I'd be lying if I said I wish that Houston. I wish Houston didn't have to play him, but I also am glad he's healthy and back. I want to talk about this game, how it plays into the season, year 2 in the Big 12 for both these schools in a second as well. But first, some folks are trying to make this game extra interesting. And if you're trying to make it a little extra interesting, I think the best place to do that is at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. In fact, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, but we got a little bit something different for you now, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks of free NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel at any time after that. Just visit FanDuel.com, download America's #1 sportsbook. We'll talk about the odds and stuff for this game specifically later in the episode. But FanDuel.com, NFL Sunday ticket, FanDuel.com. The other new buddy that I'll make sure we're getting into here a little bit with you is our buddies over at Roy, because for Coug fans that have heard about Roy, if you haven't yet, it stands for Return on You. It's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved with NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal and on the field. As you all know, NIL has completely changed the game for college athletes. Roy changed the NIL game for fans. They have exclusive content access so fans can contribute to a successful campaign, then receive access to exclusive content from the athlete, such as their announcement on decisions, behind the scenes footage, and other personal reflections, all of which are available only to the fans who supported that athlete. You also get to engage with different athletes by using Roy. Fans not only support athletes financially, but also become a part of their name, image, and likeness, the NIL journey, helping them succeed both on and off of the field. Download Roy today for iOS or Android, and enter referral code Locked On. It automatically enters a sweepstakes to win $5,000 in cash. Just join Roy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Get the Roy app for iOS and Android today. All right, Parker Rangers Locked On Cougs are joined again by Jeff Carr, who is a host of Locked On Reds, but also a big-time Cincinnati Bearcats fan. And Jeff, I want to ask about the Big 12, because, that 2021 game, American Athletic Conference Championship game, well, we don't want to talk about the score necessarily. It wasn't that long ago. These two teams were very, very well-respected and strong nationally and looked like they could make this jump to the Power 5. We both came in a year ago, kind of went through some roller coasters. I would argue, some highs and lows. And Houston's changed coaches, right? I know Cincinnati did that the year prior. What is this first Big 12 game at the gate kind of set up for year 2 in the Big 12 with Cincinnati?
I kind of feel like this season we were starting to build some expectations, and the Pitt game almost made it feel like, at least for the first 3 quarters of the game, made it feel like we were hitting those expectations early. Then the fourth quarter happened, reality set in. We're like, oh yeah, we're still working on this. But with some different guys in tow, different transfers in, like Brendan Sorsby, and you have a huge, basically I think there's 7 new starters on defense. Jordan Young is kind of their key cornerback, and he's pretty good, but he's sort of inconsistent. That's really the MO of the entire defense. It's a very inconsistent unit that can make plays, but can also allow plays quite a bit. So when it comes to this matchup, this is really going to be a big time litmus test, because I feel like that was all emotion for the Bearcats' second win against Miami for the victory bell. that was not a game that I was like, okay, we can analyze this. We can really look at this and understand how this team is going to be moving forward. There were some elements to that, but a lot of it was just like, let's get this bell back, man. And plus there was added stuff that, for Bearcat fans, they had heard this stuff because the Miami coach was like, we're only doing one more. It's like this year and next year, and there is no more scheduled rivalry matchups between the two schools. So there's an element of that and all this other stuff. So now you get into your conference, you get into the nitty gritty. And I think for this game, we just want to keep it within one score. I'm not exactly sure that, we can say without a shadow of a doubt that we expect the Bearcats to really go into their Big 12 slate and be any sort of dominant or be any sort of, the favorites or something like that, but just be competitive in every single game, make every single game as close as you possibly can.
Well, it's interesting because I don't know that I realized this until this week. Houston was the lone Big 12 win for Cincinnati a year ago. Am I right? And Houston beat Baylor and West Virginia, and going 4-8 last season was good enough to get Dana Holgorsen fired. Amongst other things too, I think he made some comments about recruiting and things like that. But Satterfield, I guess, wasn't his first year last year. First year with the program, going from the American to the Big 12 would be a daunting challenge. Wilfred's in his first year this year with Houston. Is there pressure on Satterfield to do better this year? I mean, I know it's only year 2 and you got to adjust the program, but also this program was in the college football playoff a couple years ago. Like, it feels like there's something. Am I making that up?
No, I 100% believe that there is something. I wouldn't say he's on the hot seat, but I definitely think that his seat cushion should feel a little bit warm. There's a lot of questions whenever they make a play or they have a bad half, they have a bad drive, really, where a lot of folks are like, I don't know about this guy. And I was giving him the benefit of the doubt through the first year. Really, through this beginning part of the season, I'm starting to wonder, because that Pitt game is a huge circle on the schedule right now where the Bearcats should be 3-0 heading into this Houston game. They're not. They're 2-1. They absolutely let Pitt win that game. They made 2 plays in the second half of that game, and it was the 2 times that Pitt tried to go for 2, and Cincinnati stopped them, and that was it. Those were the only plays they made. They made no plays on the offensive side of the ball. I don't even think they had a first down. There was so much about that was like, did you not think that you had to play the second half?
And I don't mean to belabor the Pitt game. I know that's probably a sore memory for Cincinnati fans, but in getting ready for this week's game, I was flipping through YouTube, watching stuff, and the first half, the YouTube clips, I'm like, how did Cincinnati lose this game? I'm like, they should have won by 20. That was crazy.
There was, and I can't think of his name, but there was a punter for Pitt that he kicked a punt, I think it was 15 yards. He shanked it so bad off of his foot that it only went 15 yards. And that drive, Cincinnati got a field goal out of it because they only went like 8 yards, and they kicked a really nice long field goal. Their new field goal kicker, which has been the other revelation of the season so far, Nathan Hawks, actually kicked a nice long field goal and made it. I'm sorry, that was Carter Brown that made that. But anyway, the point was, they were given the ball on the second half, or on the other side of the 50, and they couldn't do anything with it but get a field goal, and that was the beginning of the end. As much as we thought that it was the clarification that this game was over, it was actually the beginning of Pitt's comeback, which was so random because there's one thing, and Houston, honestly, Houston just needs to do this, run the ball, because the Bearcats defense had to sell out to stop the run on Pitt, and then they were just throwing it over top and absolutely killing them with the deep ball.
Well, and you're already kind of giving away some of my predictions, so we'll hold that off for the third segment here. Last thing on the Big 12, though, obviously Houston and Cincinnati, y'all went 3-9, and we went 4-8. Neither one of us were happy with that last year. Year 2 in the Big 12, you expect to be kind of, a little bit more of your footing and understand the conference a little bit better. Before we move on to the next segment, talk a little bit more about this game specifically. What is a successful season? Because everyone wants to say college football playoff, but everyone also needs to be honest about like where you are as a program. what's successful for Pitt this year for Pitt for Cincinnati this year in the Big 12?
For Pitt, I don't know. They came back against West Virginia. That was annoying to see too. But I would say 6 wins. Get back to a bowl. Whatever, John Henry Bowl or whatever you want to go to. But get back to a bowl this year. Play a game in late December, maybe even January. I don't know if you can get to a January bowl with 6 wins anymore, but just get back to a bowl. That's what we're looking for, and I think that would be confirmation that Scott Satterfield has taken a step forward, and maybe we can hold off on our criticism of him. But right now it's kind of feeling like, especially once they get into the meat of the Big 12 schedule and they're facing the Oklahoma States of the world, it's going to be kind of tough to get to that number.
Well, both teams want to go bowling this season, and that starts this weekend. We'll talk about this weekend's game, specifically matchups, predictions, etc., in the final segment. But before we get there, if you're trying to get to the game this weekend, the best place to get tickets is Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app for the lowest prices, guaranteed. I like a couple different aspects of the Game Time app. I like the all-in pricing, so I can see exactly what I'm going to pay. There aren't any hidden fees or any trickeration or any. I know exactly what they're going to ask for at the end of the all-in pricing. I like for concerts, comedy, things with like abnormal venues. I can get in there and see exactly what it's going to look like from my seat in my section and row for that venue, for that type of event. They got tickets to all those things: comedy, concert, theater if you're feeling fancy, sports if you're like me, whatever you're doing on the weekends. Game Time's got the ticket for you. And if you can find a ticket at the same event in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you back 110% of the difference. So download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Locked on Coogs Park Rangers back here with Jeff Carr, host of Locked on Reds, and a big-time Cincinnati Bearcat to break down the game this weekend. You mentioned that they've had some trouble with the run defense. I don't know if you've done any getting ready for this game. Houston played the almighty Rice Owls last weekend, which doesn't have a godfather in the middle, we'll say, to say the least. But Houston had a lot of success running the ball last weekend. And I look at this FanDuel line, which at the time of recording this is Cincinnati is a 3.5-point home favorite. The over-under set at 47.5. I feel like that over-under is low. I feel like both these offenses could actually, as much as Houston's offense has struggled in the past, what Cincinnati has trouble with is actually helping Houston. Am I crazy to think that for two offenses that have struggled previously, this could be an offensive game?
I would venture a guess to say that both teams score at least 24 points, and I think the only reason that one team wouldn't is that they would just struggle mightily with turnovers. We're talking like multiple interceptions, maybe a fumble or two, something like that. A lot of different plays that they just really had a hard time coming back from. I think that both of these offenses figure out ways to get points against defenses that are young and inexperienced, and they might have talent, but that talent is still very new and not yet experienced enough on the field to really take over, because there are plays that Dante Corleone can really wreak havoc on an offensive line. There are plays that Justin Bartlett made against Miami last week that he had a really good, had a couple of sacks on and stuff like that. There are plays that Jordan Young can look like a really solid cornerback, and he's wearing that number 1. So, there's going to be folks that just inherently, yeah, you wear that number 1, you're compared to Sauce Gardner. That's what's going to happen. Yeah. So whether you want to be or not, that's how that goes. So he knows what's on his shoulders, but those guys also make a lot of mistakes too. And how Houston is able to draw defenders up into the box for Cincinnati, because if they are getting 5, 6, 7 yards of carry, which Pitt was doing pretty often, and even Towson was doing pretty often, the Bearcats got a lot better about doing that against Miami, but venture a guess that Houston's got a better offensive line than Miami does.
Depending on the commenter you're talking to, they might disagree with you.
Probably. But I would venture a guess to say that Houston's going to run the ball better than Miami, and that's really going to be where the opportunities lie. Can they drop a deep ball over the top of this defense, because they're not very good man to man?
I think it's interesting because I think it's like you're saying, they're expecting this game to be 24-20 based on the way that they got things laying out there. And I weirdly feel like I don't mean to put this on the ether but I think both defenses could potentially score in this game. I think it's the kind of game where you're going to have offenses that are still getting used to, like Houston's got a new offensive coordinator, new offensive system. The quarterback was not healthy for spring practice, right? So something could happen there. Cincinnati, like you're mentioning, if they get forced into throwing the football, doesn't do that a whole lot. Like moments like that could happen. I just I look at this game, and this is obviously we're going to disagree, but that's the fun of fandom. I think the 3.5 point favorite is just because Cincinnati's at home. This game, we're neutral in Houston. I think they're the favorite, and that makes me feel like, Cincinnati is not an easy place to play. It ain't LSU. This isn't Kyle Field. I think we'll be okay. And so I'm leaning our way, obviously. I take it you're going to disagree with me, though, as you should. You got the Bearcat shirt on.
I love that. I love the home field advantage that we've got in Nippert, and it gets loud. It does get loud in there, and the student section kind of situated in the bowl of the stadium, and the way that, Nippert is so unique, and it's definitely not. It's not a Kyle Field. It's not a, not a Alton Stadium. It's not, the Big House or anything like that, but it's situated in the campus, and so it's like dug in. Everybody has to go down to their seats unless you do get an upper bowl section. But if you're in the lower bowl, everything is going downstairs. And so there's this inherent just sound tunnel that you can create when you've got the crowd into the ball game. And I don't foresee, and again, unless there are a lot of turnovers, which could happen, but I foresee this being a game that the crowd is in it every step of the way, and it's going to be a lot of fun, really, to be there or to just watch on TV. I think you're going to be able to hear that crowd on TV. So there's definitely going to be a home field advantage element to it, and I could see the 3.5 there with you. But I think that where these two teams are in their Big 12 journeys is very similar. You see really getting going. Emory Jones, all that other stuff. Yeah, they were year one of the Big 12, but even that wasn't necessarily year one of the build. This is year one of the build. This is year one of the build for Houston as well. So I really feel like both teams are in similar positions. So I definitely get the 3.5, but I also agree with you. If this were in Houston, Houston be favored. And, let's pretend they play in Atlanta. I would probably give 1.5 to Houston.
Yeah, they meet in the Peach Bowl or something.
Yeah.
Last thing before I get you out of here, because I know you have Reds baseball to cover and all that. You should go follow Locked On Reds, whether you want to follow from the nostalgia of many moons ago, or just baseball fan. The Astros have kind of been a roller coaster lately. I gotta ask you, Jeff, do you think that playing at 11 a.m. Central Time, I guess so it's noon out there, is that going to play a factor here? Because Houston's played 3 night games thus far, and that is a little bit different. Your first one of those in a year. Is the timing of the day going to be different for anybody? Is going to hit anybody?
I think so, because the Bearcats start strong. Their second half is really where the questions lie, and I think that they played pretty well against Miami in the second half last week. But I think that the Bearcats come out strong. How does Houston counter it? What's the counterpunch? What's it look like? How do they do that? Because that probably comes in the second quarter. How does that come back around? How far ahead do the Bearcats, or do they get ahead at all in the first quarter? The noon kickoff is so interesting, and especially because I've lived in both Central Time Zone and in Eastern Time Zone before. I actually prefer the Central Time Zone football schedule. I like that a little bit more.
So do I.
Yeah, I just like how that felt. But when it comes to a noon kickoff, even as a fan, like, it's a nice easy lead into the day. Get your coffee, get your brunch, get down to the ball, the stadium. I mean, still in baseball mode saying ballpark. But get down to the stadium and then you're ready for kickoff. That's just how a nice, easy Saturday flows. This noon kickoff, especially if you've got 3 straight night games leading into it, there's definitely going to be a little bit of, clear the eyes here. Let's get to playing some football. But I think by the second quarter, Houston's going to be in it anyway.
That's Jeff Carr, Locked On Reds. Again, baseball guy, but also a Cincinnati guy. So make sure you go check him out and follow him at Jeff Carr on X and social media service. Thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you're looking for a second listen, Drake Toll over at Locked On Big 12 is breaking down the whole conference, Cincinnati and Houston included. So make sure you go check that one out. Thank you all again, Locked On Cougs, primer for the Locked On podcast. Now, it's your team every day. I always wrap up with Go Cougs, Jeff. Go Cougs.